the negative consequences of both experiencing pregnancy while incarcerated and separating incarcerated mothers from their newborns, Minnesota passed the Healthy Start Act in 2021. And this law allows the Commissioner of Corrections to conditionally release sentenced pregnant and postpartum people into community-based alternatives for the duration of the pregnancy and up to 1 year postpartum. And so our evaluation, our team at the University of Minnesota aimed to assess the implementation of the Healthy Start Act. So this project was conducted through an interdisciplinary partnership between the University of Minnesota, leaders from the Minnesota Department of Corrections, and other key stakeholders. The Department of Corrections provided initial funding for an evaluation plan, and then we secured additional funds from the Sauer Family Foundation and Harris Foundation to actually carry out the evaluation. We combined data sources, did some secondary and primary data analysis through record review, and then 28 interviews with key stakeholders, and that comprised of currently and formerly incarcerated women, DOC administrators, frontline staff, and community-based organizations. So I'll turn it to Dr. Schlafer to share a little bit about some of our high-level themes and findings.
Thanks so much, Angie. So I think one of the things that we want to encourage folks to do in the interest of time is really read the full report that we'll put in the chat in just a minute. But our report focused on several major themes. We outlined 7 themes related to the qualitative findings that we had. The first was related to eligibility criteria. You can see some of the issues here related to how the eligibility criteria was refined and continued to have flexibility over time and adapted. The next major theme we had was related to screening. Who was screened in, how were folks screened, and what were the criteria? Again, over the course of the time that we were evaluating the implementation, there were 50 individuals who were screened, had initial screening, and 18 who were screened in for additional consideration. And there's additional details about the demographics of individuals in the report that you can find on page 10. Next, we considered this really delicate balance between risk and need, really trying to think about the complexities of family systems and how the department was considering this delicate balance with risk and need. We heard repeatedly throughout interviews that there was a deep need for support and not surveillance. And I think a continued consideration around how supervising agents and the department considered ways in which they could wrap around support, but not also layer on more feelings of punishment and retribution and surveillance for family systems. And then the last 3 were focused on really operationalizing the Healthy Start Act and thinking about how is this more than just a conditional release? Is it a program? Is it a policy? How are we wrapping around services? And then thinking about, as we wrap around services, what community-based resources moms recognize that they need, and what was the department able to provide in different sorts of ways. And then finally, really thinking about the fact that it became very clear to Angie and I, as we were conducting these interviews, that in many respects, the Healthy Start Act is the last intervention far downstream. And I think one of the things that became important to us and really wanting to emphasize, and if you take anything away from today's conversation, it's that we must move further upstream in identifying cross-agency early interventions to support the things that are really bringing moms to prison in the first place. And that is housing insecurity, mental health needs, substance use disorders, and really thinking about where do we intervene much earlier into the system to prevent moms from coming in to prison in the first place. We have some beautiful graphics that were done by a local graphic designer here. You'll find them throughout the report. This one follows sort of our policy implementation and some of the major themes related to things that we learned throughout, right? This idea that the department from the beginning was willing to pivot and adapt in understanding the screening criteria for the Healthy Start Act, really thinking about adapting over time how they supported HSA clients, and then really thinking about about understanding and the development of clear eligibility screening and processes with expanded conversations, with continued conversations regarding expanding eligibility criteria. And I think we have a lot to learn from this initial couple of years of implementation. And I'm hoping that today our conversation with you all and our wonderful panelists can help spark some additional conversation regarding where do we go from here as a state.
And with that, we'll drop this link in the chat as well, but to access our full evaluation report, you can scan this QR code. We'll have this again at the end, or you can visit the link that we'll drop in the chat here to really get in depth. That was just a very high level, quick overview, but if you want to get into the nitty gritty a bit more, that is where you can do so. And so with that, again, I said that we were going to move through that quickly, and we were, because I want as much time as possible for our lovely panel discussion. So we will start. I will stop sharing my screen so we can actually see each other's faces. I don't think we need to look at that necessarily, but we'll start with our panelists. I'll kind of call on you in order, but we will start with kind of just an introduction. So if you can share a little bit about yourself and then just broadly your involvement or experience with the Healthy Start Act, that would be great. And we will start with Dr. Schlafer.
Thanks, Angie. And you should introduce yourself too. So as Angie said at the top of the hour, my name is Rebecca Schlafer. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics. I have been partnering with the Minnesota Prison Doula Project since 2010 to evaluate the outcomes of pregnant and postpartum people in Minnesota's Department of Corrections, and have come to collaborate with the department in many ways over the years. This is one of many projects that evolved over the course of the last 15 years, where we really worked hard to better understand what were the needs of pregnant people who were in our state's women's prison and how could we better support them. And so I had the opportunity to testify early on when this bill was coming forward and work with the commissioner and others leaders to try to better understand what this policy could look like, and then led the evaluation with you, Angie, to put this report together. So I'm really honored to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll turn it over to Ms. Timlin.
Thank you, Angie. Good morning. My name is Lori Timlin. I'm the parenting coordinator at the correctional facility in Shakopee. And in 2021, I, along with Kelly Heifort, who is our director of reentry services, were tasked with developing policy and procedure around the law that had been passed regarding the Healthy Start conditional release. I will say with all honesty, Kelly did the lion's share of work. She's brilliant, and she convened our multidisciplinary group and really is responsible for a lot of the final product. She also, along with me, co-chairs all of our Healthy Start meetings, which are done again as a multidisciplinary team. My primary role is that I am the on-site person at Shakopee. I do the initial screening with pregnant and postpartum women and determine whether they fit the criteria, which are minimal. It's, are you able to legally parent, and does the length of your sentence allow you to reach your confinement release date before the unborn baby's first birthday? And then I put together screening information, which I disseminate to team members. We do a public safety screening, and if a woman is able to be approved through that, then we meet as a team and really begin doing the parenting. So I walk alongside the woman throughout her time at Shakopee and make connections with things like a medical release planner, getting her benefits ready to go for when she leaves, assisting her in identifying community partners, inviting people to the table. If she has a question, I'm the person who's here that she can reach out to. And then once the person is approved for Healthy Start, I take off with our community navigator, who is Kelly Turner. And Kelly's a newer and really integral part of how we do this. We didn't originally start with that kind of position. So that is my role.
Thank you so much. We'll get into the nitty-gritty in our next couple of questions too, so I appreciate you alluding to that already. And last but certainly not least, we have the lovely Victoria Lopez, if you want to introduce yourself and share your involvement or experience with the Healthy Start Act too.
Hi, so I am Victoria Lopez. I became involved with the Healthy Start because I was enrolled in November 4th of 22 and my twin baby girls were born while I was in custody. I was blessed to get into the enrolled into this lovely program as a third statistic. I technically didn't exist. I came in on an 88-month sentence. I was already deep in my recovery journey for multiple years when I was incarcerated, and I had to commit to the prison when my twins turned 1. And so it's been a long journey, but with the help of Dr. Slafer and Dr. Usman and Ms. Timlin, yes, it's been fascinating to learn and just get really into the nitty-gritty, as Angie stated, and learning where the barriers are. So yes, I have been out of prison since July 8th of 23, and I am of 2024. I went in 23. And so yeah, this is amazing that I get to be involved in this.
Thank you so much for all of your wonderful introductions. I'm so thrilled to have all of us in this space together to have this conversation. I think it's been a long time coming. And so Victoria already kind of alluded to some of this, and Ms. Timlin, you did as well. So this question is geared towards you, Ms. Timlin. I'm wondering, what do you see as the biggest barriers to women being screened into participating in HSA, like you said?
You're muted.
It will never be something that, so I think that there are barriers to the screening, and then I think there are barriers to participation. For sure, one of the challenges that we did not anticipate are length of sentences. So the law allows us to provide conditional release until the child's first birthday. So it eliminates a lot of women whose sentences extend beyond that. And we have really tried to be flexible if there are cases that there are very brief periods of time that would eliminate someone. But the reality was women's sentences, it sometimes extended 1 to 2 years beyond that, and we simply could not accommodate those. And yet it's the law. It's not something that we can really massage. The other thing that has cropped up is we are really struggling to feel that we can effectively work alongside child protection agencies. So it may be in the state of Minnesota, I'm assuming many of us are well aware of this. If one has an involuntary termination of parental rights, it can indicate future involvement with children that may be born later in that woman's life. And it is either impossible to know the outcome because the baby is too new, or it may be that the county has already made a determination to move forward with a termination of the woman's rights to that baby. And so sometimes we've tried to defer a decision to see if we can support the mom in a case plan and get an outcome that would allow for the mom to continue to parent. But there are so many things that are unknown, and there is so much difference from one county to another county to another. So we can never quite say, well, if it's this, then it's this, because it seems that each county has their own procedures, their own interpretation of those laws. So those have been two things that have really presented problems for women in being part of this conditional release. Dr. Schleifer?
Yeah, Lori, I'm hoping that you can clarify for the audience because I suspect some people are already thinking, you talked about this timeline being 1 year, but we also heard from Ms. Lopez that she had an 88-month sentence. So can you talk
Yeah.
about how those two things can be true at the same time?
Yes, so Ms. Lopez and another woman had there's a provision in the law that allows for us to consider a release if it is medically indicated as being in the best interest of the child's welfare. And so we have had two situations, of which Ms. Lopez is one, where there was a medical situation where clearly the presence of the mom was a very important factor for these babies. And so we actually, thank you to our department for all of the different people who are involved, because these are things we've never done before. And I would not describe the Department of Corrections as fluid and spontaneous. So these were really kind of revolutionary. And so Ms. Lopez was actually granted her release before she physically entered the facility, because those babies showed up way before they were supposed to, and they clearly needed their mother's presence for their physical health, not to mention their emotional health. So she had the unique situation of the commissioner saying, yes, we feel it's vital for her to be present now. And so she was granted 1 year of time. And she actually reported at the point at which her babies turned 1 year old to serve her time. There was another mom who was incarcerated whose son had some very critical medical treatment. And so it was a conditional release, but you could think of it almost as a furlough, where on two separate occasions, she was able to be present. She actually stayed at the hospital with her baby and the baby's temporary caregiver. And ultimately, that was so beneficial to the baby, not to mention the mom's ability to provide care for those precious new babies. So we did a lot of discussion at the point at which we were developing policy about releasing at the time of pregnancy and childbirth and allowing that 1 year, or allowing mom to be with the baby for 1 year and then come back and serve her time. And we could not find any research or indication that one slightly outweighed another. It was really one developmental insult versus another developmental insult. And we concluded that if we were to look at good correctional practice, having someone come back to prison when they're doing well in the community made no sense, and possibly could be even harder than separating from a newborn. So that has been a tremendous challenge for the women who have been involved.
Thank you for providing that additional clarification. I just want to, I know we have lots of questions, but Victoria, I wanted to pass it to you too, to see if you had anything you wanted to add related to what Ms. Timlin was saying.
So I, for one, am very grateful for fitting in that gray area. That's also what has motivated me to continue succeeding and doing so well, is because I got a chance given to me that was not even normally a possibility. And so it has inspired me to keep digging in and keep moving forward. I will note that as we talked about the two offenses, where it's like, do you go in early? Do you go in later? It was mentally hard and weighing on me, because every time my twins, and not to mention, I also had a 1-year-old in the home, and then my 19-year-old, who's now 19. So I had a various point of children in my home that every month that went forward and I was progressing and the children were growing and they were getting healthy, it was one less month that I had with my babies. And so it was a very dual emotion. But through that year, I did have the support of the resources that were my doulas and Miss Timlin and all these other resources. And then when I intaked into the prison, then Ingie and Rebecca, I got to lean on them and have them also there as supports and just insight and how to navigate the different emotions and feelings that were going, and the barriers that happen between each agencies, and the different and the invisible walls that are in the DOC but yet I still had the same OID number. And so it's just really building that communication and making that connection. And that's why we're all here today too, is building that connection from inside to the outside, especially in situations where, like, for instance, I was already in recovery. I got an extra year on top of my already out in recovery and my newly built life with my children, and then had to say goodbye at one. But I was grateful that I got to prepare as best as I could, and get them to the point where they were stable enough to leave, and prepare myself as best as I could. But in reality, you can never prepare yourself to break away. It's just building those resources. And so for me, yes, that I see where that indifference is. Like, do you leave now? Do you leave later? But in all, it's still effective. It still affects both ends of the party, but at the same time, it's what resources are out there to stabilize that.
Thank you for adding that on. I feel like that is such important context, and I appreciate you all kind of getting into the nuance of that situation. So thinking about our evaluation that Dr. Schlafer and I conducted, that was really focused on the implementation of the Healthy Start Act, right? It's a very new policy still. It seems a bit early or premature to start thinking about what those outcomes are. And as we started to think about, what outcomes we might want to consider, the idea of success became a really interesting conversation of what does it mean to be successful on the Healthy Start Act? How do we measure success? What does that even look like? It could look a lot of different ways. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, Ms. Timlin and Victoria, what would be an indication that the Healthy Start Act is successful? And we'll start with Victoria.
So for one, I have also got the pleasure of meeting a few of the women that have been in the Healthy Start Act. And so I could not imagine not knowing my babies at all. I had to say goodbye in the hospital before I got the call from Ms. Timlin, given me the facts and the details of this new law that was built into Minnesota. And I was in the most distressing moment in my life. I just said goodbye to my babies. And I thought I wouldn't see them for 7 years. And so for that, meeting women that have had the ability to get in this program and be enrolled, they have that little bit more hope installed inside them, where they're like, I got to know my babies. I have this motivation. I have this drive. They know what life they want to go home to. And you can see it in them. They have that purpose given to them. Like they had that hope built into them. And just that little bit of hope really grew a lot in a lot of them. And then there was the women that I got to meet that didn't get that opportunity. And for me, I got that, like I said, that dual, because I had to explain to them, like, we're both here without our children right now. The difference, though, is that they never got to see that little bit of life that they could have. And so they were without that moment, and they were just yearning for it. And so, yes, the idea of the Healthy Start Act and the birthing of it is a great phenomenon if you think about it, because you're installing, and if they fit into that criteria of time and they abide and make use of their resources, it's not set up for failure. Because then the idea is you never leave your child. You get your child, you keep working forward, you install, you invest, you integrate into this home and this family made situation with every resource possible given to you. And if you abide and you stay on track, you will not leave your child. And then it creates the healthy start of a life. And then where the barriers that we're speaking about then is finding who can join in, and where we draw those lines is that I still had the ability to communicate because I had such great resources before I went in. And with those resources, I was able to communicate even further and help build into this program more. And so, yes, on the scale of is it working, and is it the healthy start? It is. It really is, and it's growing even more now because we're in this panel right now. So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Victoria. Yeah, thinking about success and all these multifaceted ways around family connectedness and integration in the community and being with and staying with your family, I think is really important to think about here. Ms. Timlin, do you have anything else that you would think of that would be an indication that the Healthy Start Act is successful?
Well, I think I would hope that it gives women the opportunity to secure their position as a parent and not have to have concerns about losing custody, losing parental rights, which is always a risk if you're physically absent from your baby. We also historically have had some really unfortunate situations where moms have not had a safe, stable caregiver who can step in during the time of their incarceration. So I hope that it alleviates some of that for moms. And then, of course, in corrections, we hope that it also reduces the likelihood of a mom coming back to incarceration, because I do hear from women that the loss of their children for them was an impetus for ongoing chemical use or resuming whatever got them to prison in the first place. So hopefully it also helps them secure their position in the community.
Thank you so much. So thinking back to the really quick overview that Dr. Schlafer gave about our evaluation findings and results, one of the biggest takeaways that she noted was thinking more upstream. How can we intervene earlier in the community to meet these moms and babies and families, and diverting them from even being involved in the system in the first place? So I'm wondering, from your perspective, where are there opportunities for upstream interventions? So before women end up in prison in the first place. And we'll pass that to Rebecca and Victoria, and we'll start with Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. I mean, I think one of the things that we heard time and time again from talking with professionals and the moms themselves was that, like, simply opening the door at this point of intervention with the Healthy Start Act didn't resolve many of the conditions that led moms to incarceration in the first place, right? So we heard concerns about that we can open the door and release, but does someone have a safe and stable place to live? Are they in a relationship that is safe from a partner who may have been engaging in domestic violence? Do they have a place to support their mental health and address their substance use disorder? I think when we consider the things that are driving so many women to prison in the first place, there are opportunities for upstream intervention, right? First and foremost, we have to have more stable housing. We have to have more safe and stable housing. And those are policy decisions that we can make as a state around where we invest in resources. I think even then we need to consider for moms who have substance use disorder, we don't simply have enough SUD treatment and family-friendly SUD treatment. And so where can there be investments in particularly residential treatment facilities that allow moms to stay with their babies, so that if substance use is the issue that is connected to their criminal legal system engagement, we're actually addressing the root of that issue. I think something that Lori said still really resonates with me, right? Which is this idea that so many of the moms we talked to had substance use issues that led to the separation or temporary separation of their children through Child Protective Services at some point in their past. That contributed to ongoing substance misuse. That contributed to their engagement in the criminal legal system. And we just see this cycle of loss and unresolved grief that was sort of compounding for moms. So I think for me, the question is sort of, where do we intervene in those early systems of substance use disorder, mental health issues, and support earlier investments in moms' well-being. And again, for those who are being touched by the criminal legal system, sort of early in the criminal legal system process, I think we have to have conversations on probation and adjudication and with judges about what those alternatives are there before we end up with a felony conviction and a commissioner needing to make a decision. I don't know. Victoria, what do you think?
Okay, so I get the pleasure. I'm a peer recovery specialist. I'm like the nomad of Southern Minnesota because I'm not in just one location. I'm everywhere. And I get the pleasure of doing that while on ISR, only with the help of said resources and all you lovely women. I work one of the biggest issues. So I work with drug courts, family and criminal. Okay. And so a lot of the women, and I work with CPS, I work with EMTs, I work with the police departments. Like I've integrated myself and made that I've acquainted myself with them because I've learned these barriers. Because before I got my felony for my first degree in 2020, my daughter did get taken by CPS and I felt like I had no value. I felt like I had no purpose. I only knew my identity as a mother and as a spouse. And so when I lost the spouse, the girlfriend status from a domestic, and poor relationships because I didn't know my self-value growing up. I had thought I was very independent and I thought I was very like fearless, but really I wasn't. So when that CPS case happened and my oldest was taken, I just spiraled. And then I went into chemical addiction after being sober for 8 years. And so when I did that, instead of like working on me, they wanted me to be this ideal parent. So they give you this checklist. And in that checklist, they forgot that I was already relapsing mentally before I actually relapsed. And so for me, I've noticed that these women that I work with in family drug court, which is before criminal drug court, is that they have not found their self-worth. And I'm walking through this with them, and they don't have stable housing and they don't have safe shelter. I just ran into this problem last week. 2 women that were in a mother and child facility treatment center were removed from the treatment center because they couldn't adequately provide the services needed due to distance. And they were left without shelter. Well, the mother was. So then she, in turn, tried going back to her natural behaviors, which was old stinking thinking. Well, I get to step in and intervene just because I'm stubborn like that some days. And I got to say, hey, let's do this. Like, let's do these trauma groups. Let's keep your mind occupied. So for me, I think that if we're looking where we can intervene prior to the criminal sentence, it would be involving ourselves with these family drug courts, which is not criminal yet. There's just family involved, and that's the preventative before the felony comes. And so that's where I'm trying to really integrate myself into right now because I've seen both sides of it. And so that would be one area that I would really kind of focus on, because that's where a lot of our women are in Minnesota, are in these family drug courts, and then they don't succeed because they're just focusing on what they need to do to keep their child, but they're not focusing on what they need to do to love themselves and to invest into who they are. And so that's where I see that coming. And I only know that because I lived that experience. And it took me going to prison, because even though I was put into this program and I had all these years of recovery under my belt, I still didn't know what self-love was. And so I kept doing what I needed to do. And then when I was released from prison, I came home to a broken home. So I had the involvement with the Healthy Start. It was wonderful. I had all the resources. I got into the prison. My program ended when I got into the prison. So then I was like free for all and general pop. And then I got into another amazing release program, which is CIP, but they're 2 different programs. Okay. And so only because of my stubbornness and my desire to communicate, did I still have access to those resources and like growing. But then I got home and I was in a domestic where I was, my ex tried stabbing me, and I felt so alone, because the barrier is that not all agencies communicate. But here we are communicating, and this is great because, like I said, family drug courts, even working with the doctors, my doctors really aided me. Even now, like I get on my test results from the doctors, I get compliments like, "Hey, great work on your recovery," because it's all about communicating.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Victoria, and for being so open and vulnerable with embedding your story into some of those recommendations too. I know it's really impactful and appreciated. This question that we already had lined up also lines with the question that we got in the Q&A, so it's perfect. But I'm wondering, Lori, Ms. Timlin, from your perspective, what's something that you think other states need to consider when identifying alternatives to incarceration for this population?
So I do feel the need to say, I am not speaking for the Department of Corrections when I say this. So this is as a professional being in different arenas around this is what has stuck out to me, is that the length of time we're able to work with women often is not enough. And we don't have a graceful way to end our involvement. So I feel like when it's happening, it can be so fruitful and beneficial. And then we have sometimes, depending on how far along in a pregnancy a woman is when she comes in, we may only have a matter of a few months, and we can get a good start, but who are we kidding? We cannot begin to tackle lifelong trauma and substance abuse within a few months. So I worry often that we only had more time, not that we want to be involved in people's lives forever, but I think as Dr. Schlafer commented, there are a lot of missed opportunities prior to them coming to prison. And we can do a lot, and it, as I said, it can be terrific, but then we end and we, preface it, we give them notice, we talk about, we'll still try to offer you some resources. But the reality is, as Victoria experienced, there's an end point, and then suddenly you still have to contend with many, many things that can take clearly beyond a year to try to come to grips with. So I think if there was a way to extend that time, obviously it would be more costly, but I also think that there are individuals for whom that would be a much better fit. I think that we have tried to be really flexible, which is both a strength and can be a little confusing for others because each individual case has such unique needs. So we cannot simply say we will do these 3 things, because again, I'm not sure I can compare 2 cases where it's been, oh gosh, they were so similar. So we have to be able, and we were really learning as doing, because this was not a program that had existed beyond our involvement. I cannot say enough about the challenges of housing for a woman with children who may have a poor rental history and clearly has a felony. Not to mention just the plain expense of it for someone who is clearly not likely to be working full time. So for all geographic areas, I'm sure that there's a similar experience, and we have been able sometimes to offset the cost or try to massage someone's acceptance of a tenant, but there's simply, when you get beyond the metro area, there just are enough. There are not enough options. It's just, there isn't enough out there. So those are the things that I think I would identify as, being mindful going into it about how will we work with what we anticipate would be issues.
Angie, can I just add on one thing here? And I think this point that Lori emphasized around each case was so different was something that we really struggled with in our evaluation of this implementation, right? And I think the point that you made, Lori, regarding like this idea that we want to have flexibility, that the department wants to have flexibility in the screening criteria was so important. And yet it led to confusion and frustration for clients around, well, am I in or am I out? Will I be in? Will I be out? What do judges know? What do lawyers know? And I think there's a lot to be learned and a lot to be implemented moving forward around how do we balance this flexibility and the desire to look at each case individually with some boundaries or expectations for others around what is in, what is out. And I think for researchers, for us as researchers, that was really challenging to sort of get our hands around. And yet, I think it's, to your point, to the credit to the department that they were willing to adapt over time to consider each case and not be so rigid in their thinking around, a case like Miss Lopez, where that was not going to be one that would be eligible at first blush. So I just think those tensions are really hard and really important to consider here.
Thanks for adding that on. I appreciate it. We are nearing the end of our structured questions, and then we'll move into Q&A, but I'm wondering, what are 1 to 2 changes you'd recommend the Minnesota Department of Corrections consider as it relates to this policy or just supporting pregnant and postpartum people in this space in general? And I will pass that to Dr. Schlafer first, and then Victoria.
I mean, I think echoing what Lori said earlier, I think we really need to consider ways in which we can have moms with an extended period of time, right? What does the timeline look like for intervention? And I think we need to consider more cross-agency solutions for earlier intervention. That's not necessarily only the Department of Corrections by virtue of it being cross-agency, but I do think lots to be done in terms of interagency solutions here to these complex problems.
I would have to say that for me it would be just that I know that on a side note we've spoke about when I went in, my biggest thing is because I was already affiliated with having the joy of being that full-time parent. When I went in, one of my biggest losses was that I was not involved. And so with the help of Miss Timlin and the lovely doctors and Mayo Clinic and just my communication, I was able to um be a part of their growing and their care through Zoom. And I know that's not like every situation, but I was able to be a part of that at least once a week. And that really lifted my spirits and made me feel like I was parenting still. And it gave me that purpose. And again, then the barrier came with when I switched into a new program. And so just us communicating, because it was like, well, that was that program and then that was that program. And it's like, really, I'm still a parent. And I still had this desire to parent, even in the gloomiest situation of being away. And so that really helped me. And then again, we talked about preventative maintenance. So it's like getting their care providers involved before it becomes even further, because it's more accountability for us. For me, my biggest key structure is accountability and communicating in between the different agencies. And so, yeah, those are the two things, is just integrating that family therapy inside the walls and trying to formulate some kind of plan. And again, it's case by case, but even just like making sure to do that self-care checklist. Like, do you have people out there that you need to communicate with? What needs do you feel like you need to be as involved as you can? So that way you're not getting out feeling like a failure already.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And our last structured question for the panelists before we turn to Q&A, recognizing this is a sentiment that was expressed a lot today, that this is far from the end of the work. This is not the be-all end-all solution. So I'm wondering, for our panelists, where would you like to see the work go from here? We'll start with Ms. Timlin.
It's legislative, but I wonder if there is a conversation to be had about how do we balance the needs of the victim with the potential for a woman who has a longer sentence to be able to take advantage of things that will, I think, better secure her in a pro-social kind of position in the community and not penalize her kids. Anecdotally, many of the women who had long sentences would have really been pretty dynamic candidates for this kind of, but there's also a victim, right? Who whose thoughts and feelings need to be considered. And obviously we can do nothing about influencing the length of the program because it's set in law. So I think it's to continue to have a conversation about, are there situations where we could, find individual, again, that very person-centered approach where it would still make sense and we could satisfy the needs of the family who may be involved as victims. So hopefully we can begin to have some conversations around that.
Thank you so much. Victoria, do you want to go next?
For me, it's kind of piggybacking off of that. I was a third statistic, and I am so grateful for that opportunity and that I continue having, because my children, I'm back with my children for one. And I did that in 9 months because of the belief and the hope that was installed and the resources that I had and the knowledge that I learned before going in. And so with that, I guess for me, it's just, I understand that it's legislative laws, but implementing in there like side clauses of like the ones that maybe don't get considered, that they have that extra care of how do you integrate them into a parenting mode, and not strip them of that parenting role. Because otherwise they're getting out and they're fresh meat. They're like, what? I have these kids and I don't know how to parent and I don't have this communication bond. And so that is probably the biggest thing I asked every woman in the facility when I was there. I didn't ask them about their shoes. I asked them, what is it you feel you need to do to be a better parent when you come home? And they said, I don't know my kids anymore. And so it's just building that communication. So for the ones that aren't considered or like eligible, it's just building that establishment from mother to child and mother to home base. And then for the ones that are considered, it's just like Lori said about extending the resources, because it was very cut and dry. And so, and it was like, well, you're not in the program no more. Well, again, I'm stubborn. So I'm like, but I just need you to speak to me. I want to communicate. And so, and that was, I'm grateful that I had that. But some people don't know they have that right to ask questions because you feel like you're already in a situation where you have what you deserve. Where I'm like, no, I know I love myself now and I love my family and my community. And so some people don't realize they have that ability to advocate. And so it's letting them know, like, hey, what do you need? I'm listening.
Thank you, Victoria. And finally, Dr. Schlafer, where would you like to see the work go?
Oh, I could take a whole nother hour, but I think one of the things we really, really have to think about here is the way in which the Healthy Start Act can be integrated with other mechanisms that exist within the department, right? So Victoria talked about the CIP, and I think that's one model, right, where there is a reduction in length of time, but that comes with other constraints. And so I think we need to do a better job of understanding how Healthy Start fits in with other conditional release mechanisms, whether that's things like work release. Is there such a thing that we could consider like parenting release? What are the ways in which if somebody's out on Healthy Start and they're really being successful, that we don't ever have to consider bringing them back, right? Like what can be done to support them for longer periods of time in community? And I think that's where we have to go next. In addition to okay, so moms who get released, what do we do for them? And how are we working with judges and other court actors earlier in the system to intervene so that we are not getting the felony conviction in the first place, and figuring out what prevents that separation?
Victoria, did you have something you wanted to add? Oh, you're muted.
My other biggest barrier coming home was that I was so used to the resources and the communication I had while in the Healthy Start program that when I kept bouncing through, moving forward through the DOC programs, when I got out, there was that miscommunication between, because of the laws and the legislative, there's something that's not intertwining the release conditions and the Healthy Start release conditions. So that's where, for me, before I went in, it was like all about the kids and family and rebuilding. And then I went in and I got out on CIP. And when I got out, it was like, hey, I want to take my kids to the park. And they're like, what? Like, why would, like, you're on ISR, you have these conditions. And I'm like, but I'm a mom and I want to invest in my kids. Why can't I take them to the park? Well, and it's switching care for care. Do you give up your self-care for their self-care? No, that's not healthy for an individual. You both need self-care. And so it's just building that communication, like, hey, these individuals were in this other program, and recognizing that, because that was the biggest thing I heard from people that weren't aware of this program and that weren't educated in the Healthy Start program. They're like, well, that's not our program. That's not our program. So you're going to have to deal with it. And so that was a big barrier that I had. And thankfully I've been conjoining them because otherwise I wouldn't have that time with my kids. I got out and I felt lost. I felt like I didn't have communication because they were not aware of our program. And so they're like, well, why would we let you go to the park with your kids? And it was like, why wouldn't you? So that is the other biggest thing, is educating the ones that work alongside us on what the goal is here.
Thank you so much. So with that, we're going to move into some of the questions that were submitted from our participants. I'm going to combine a couple just for the sake of time. So one question that we got in the chat was, what type of supports are provided to the mothers who are released in the community? What kind of hands-on supports are they receiving to begin raising their children in the community? And then with that, kind of another question combined in, are there efforts to connect parents to legal services and support too? Like what sort of supports are provided to mothers who participate in this program?
Lori, you should take that one. You're best equipped.
Sure. As we put together a plan for the mom when she's preparing to begin her release, the law requires that she has to participate in one of 6 things: substance use treatment, mental health treatment, employment, vocational training, adult education, and parenting education. And so part of her release is she has to designate at least one area. And so that guides us a little bit. We try to do as much as we can before she's released in terms of having benefits in place, knowing where she's going to obtain her medical care and deliver her child, having her housing established, and ideally having at least an initial financial obligation for her housing established. I kind of take off with Kelly Turner, who, as I mentioned before, is our community navigator. And Kelly is not about going and getting things for people, but helping people understand, if I have this need, here is where I may find resources. We also encourage the women to consider the option of a visiting nurse, both because of the informal education they provide, the convenience, etc. If they have a child protection case that's open, we are definitely wanting to look at what she needs to do to be compliant for a case plan. Most of the moms choose to also have parenting education, whether that's their primary area that they're going to be performing or complying with. The doulas also will stay involved for some postnatal care. We've shifted a little bit from asking the doulas to do navigation to allowing them to just be doulas, which is a lot already. And they often also can contribute with identifying resources around things like physical needs for children, making sure that beyond WIC, they know where one might be able to get a low cost or no cost car seat, etc. So we definitely try to use a wraparound approach. We had a mom who struggled with pretty significant mental illness. So we were part of an advocate, an arms worker, outpatient therapy. This poor woman had so many things on her plate, but all of which were really necessary. So I like to think of us as coordinating that, and then just also staying in touch with how that's being. And then also just Kelly is always there saying, what are your needs? What can we do for you? If a person is on release this long, we as a team will invite them to the table in this sort of format to hear if there are additional needs we could be considering. We also do a meeting prior to their leaving our conditional release program so that we can anticipate if there's anything we might be able to offer. So we definitely try to look for, invite feedback about what the needs are, and then be ready to, we do have some money available to us, but our goal is really to have women in their home community be able to identify, this is where I go for this type of need, so that we do feel like they have some information to be able to sustain themselves once we completely close out.
Thank you. This question alludes to something that Victoria touched on a lot, which was, opportunities to parent from inside. So somebody asked, it's so hard for women to qualify. Have there been discussions about returning to having more opportunities to parent from within the walls of the prison? HSA as it currently exists seems like such a tiny fix that helps so few. Kids need their moms beyond age 1. Anybody want to take that?
So I will say right before I left CIP, the boot camp, which is on the property of the prison, I rattled a lot of cages about trying to continue that Zoom meetings with my babies, which was with the doctors, which was with early physical therapy, and it stopped when I got there. But before I left, I will say that they did handle the flyer about would it be beneficial to these women to have once a month or once a week therapy sessions with their school counselors or set up through their hospital. And so that flyer did go out because they are taken into consideration to find a better way to connect the moms with their children, or even with their dependents that aren't their children. And so, yeah, I will say that I know for sure that was one of the questionnaires getting given out, and I was super excited to see that.
Thank you. Dr.
Add in. Oh, did I interrupt you, Rebecca?
No.
So visiting from prison is hard. I wish that it were not, but there's no world in which it's not. So that is just such a reality. I know that it's been a long time coming that our visiting policy is being updated and rewritten. And even things that may sound kind of small, like allowing people to use other forms of identification in lieu of a birth certificate, which can be very expensive and hard to obtain, I think will improve people's abilities to have their children visit. We've tried a lot of things. I was part of a legislative proposal that didn't pass about having a bus for transportation that would go to various sites outstate. We, at one time, had extended visits and, you know, COVID happened. A lot of things have happened that have changed that. I think that women have the greatest obstacle with transportation and also with having someone who can qualify to visit, who's willing to bring their children to visit. And I'm not aware of major proposals right now that would address those. And a lot of it is a financial reality. A lot of it is we're located in a suburban area that has limited mass transit. I mean, there's lots of factors. So I acknowledge it. I think there are small things happening through policy, but I think we are definitely aware that it is really hard for moms to have consistent visits with their kids. And then the sort of counterintuitive thing is that I can assist with visits when an agency such as Child Protection is involved. So a professional can ask me to assist. And again, I'm glad to do it. But what about for all the moms who don't have child protection involvement? So we also now have 2 family support positions which are new, one of which is housed in Rush City and one of which is housed in Stillwater, to begin with the vast numbers of incarcerated men to try to address some of those gaps in services.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your wonderful and thoughtful questions, and thank you to our panelists for your time and sharing your wisdom and expertise. Just before we wrap up, we have some resources. So here's the QR code again to our evaluation report. You can also click on that link. I think we'll drop it in the chat. I just want to thank again our panelists, Dr. Rebecca Schlafer, Miss Lori Timlin, and Miss Victoria Lopez. Please scan the QR code to submit your evaluation, or you can use the link that we'll drop in the chat. We appreciate your feedback. And thank you all again for joining us today. We'll be sure to send out slides and recording at a later date. Thank you all.